Here with CMI Confidence, it all starts with the tools at your fingertips. CMI creates workplaces full of inspiring leaders with its on-demand resources, network of mentors and industry-leading accreditations. Search CMI Confidence today.
This session is recorded and will be available on the CMI website and YouTube channel. Join the conversation by using the live chat box for your questions and comments. We'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Values-Based Leadership and Motivation digital event hosted by the CMI West Midlands and Northwest Regional Board. My name is Michael Bolt, and I'm an Events Delivery Manager at CMI. Please do join the conversation today by using the live chat box. Let us know where you're joining us from, and please post any questions you have, and we'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A. And I'll now hand over to Nick Smith, who is the Chair of our West Midlands and Northwest Regional Board, to begin today's event.
Thank you, Michael, and Craig in the background, and welcome everyone to this values-based leadership and motivation digital event. With everything going on in the world at the moment, values-based leadership is more important than ever, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Nick O'Sullivan MBE to share his leadership and motivation insights with us. Nick is a leadership and management specialist who honed his skills as a Royal Marines officer during 2 operational tours in Afghanistan. In a previous career, I had the privilege of working with Royal Marines like Nick. I always found them to be extremely professional, and I was always impressed with how they worked so successfully with others to achieve their objectives, something I know Nick will talk about today. Today's therefore a welcome opportunity to hear from Nick about how values-based leadership can motivate individuals and teams, but also a perfect opportunity to ask Nick any questions you may have following his presentation. So without further ado, over to you, Nick.
Thank you very much, Nick. Yeah, thanks for having me. And thanks for everyone who's tuned in or indeed watching on Catch Up. So I spent just under 13 years in the Royal Marines, and a core part of the Royal Marines is the values that make up the organisation. And over my career, I increasingly experienced and lived those values impacting us day to day, and we would regularly use the values to guide our decision making. And never really was that more noticeable in terms of the success and the outcomes it enabled us to achieve than perhaps my second tour of Afghanistan with 4-5 Commando, where we achieved some phenomenal success. And I'll tell that story in a minute. But it would be remiss of me to talk about values-based leadership based on the story from the Royal Marines without making clear actually what the values of the Royal Marines are. So on the first slide I'd like to show you, this was actually a card that we were all given, I think on my first tour of Afghanistan a few years previously. And we're all given it just to remind everyone of, this is what it's about to be a Royal Marines. And the 4 core values we have were excellence, integrity, self-discipline, and humility. And the way we would deliver those were with the elements of the commando spirit, so courage, determination, unselfishness, putting other people first, and cheerfulness, keeping a head up and keeping good humor, basically, even when things were looking like they were going a bit Pete Tong. But those values of excellence, integrity, self-discipline, humility, that was what bound us. Yes, we were bound by other things like, the green beret we wore and the badges we had on our uniform. But when it came down to practice and how we operated, it was those values that bonded us. And it didn't just bond us in terms of Royal Marines, but it had an effect on those we worked with. So let me tell you a little bit about then my tour with 4-5 Commando in Afghanistan in 2011 for, as I say, a really good example of that. So I just wanted to explain a little bit about how it works when a military unit deployed to Afghanistan. You would have a core element of the people power, and for us that was 4-5 Commando. So that's a picture of 4-5 Commando on Lunam Bay Beach near their base in Arbroath, and actually that was an address to the unit shortly before we deployed. So they would make up the core of your manpower. But to make sure we as an organisation could operate and deliver the tasks that we've been given to deliver, we would have lots of elements attached to it from various different parts of the military and beyond to make sure we could accomplish all the things we were required to. So that meant having elements of the RAF, which might mean helicopter pilots, air crew, ground crew, whatever it might be required to enable us to operate. And it might mean having elements of the army. So we had artillery specialists, we had engineers, or sappers as they're known, on the back of the guy's t-shirt. We had communication specialists with their specialist equipment. And all these elements of the RAF and Army, as I say, they have their own equipment, their own procedures, their own operating constraints that need to be considered, and to an extent, their own different culture. So if you've ever worked with the military, you might well know that different parts of the military have a different sort of cultural slant. And that's definitely true between Marines, RAF, and Army as well. So there were cultural differences to consider. One of which is the relationship between the officers and, if you like, the wider rank and file of the unit. So the Marines, as far as I know, is the only part of the military where the officers and the rank and file are trained together. The RAF, Army and Navy all actually have a separate training establishment for their officer cadre. So because the Royal Marines go to the same place to do their training, they have less of a gap, arguably, between the rank and file and the officers. And there's that provides an interesting cultural difference between parts of the military. But it wasn't just the different elements of the military components that we had to consider. We also worked with non-military elements. So we worked with government departments like the Department for International Development, so DFID, and quite a lot of other civil servants would also be there, non-military people. And again, the cultural differences, the procedural differences, the policy differences all needed to be factored in to make up an organisation that could function effectively as a whole. But it wasn't just UK elements. We obviously also worked with Afghan elements. So we had the Afghan National Police, we had the Afghan National Army. And again, the differences between those, the Afghan National Army reported to a different bit of the Afghan government than the police did. And so there was a whole host of considerations to work with there, and obviously cultural and even language differences. And then there was the operating environment we were in, which was pretty demanding. So, you know, you could be in the middle of a village or town centre one moment in a busy marketplace, and you know, there were threats of suicide bombers, or you could be patrolling the fields in the green zone. There were lots of threats of IEDs or improvised explosive devices, and you might be getting sort of spotted or monitored or spied upon by Taliban people, and you just didn't know. It was a really difficult environment to operate in. And so if you were on the ground, you had all this heavy kit and equipment, you're operating in 40+ degrees heat in a very stressful dynamic situation. But other elements of the organisation had their own challenges. So as an example, I can remember one day I was doing some exercise, just running around the inside of the camp, basically. And I ran past the vehicle bay where they repaired some of the vehicles, and it was the Army attachment mechanics would repair and maintain a lot of the vehicles for us. And I ran past this guy, and he was lying on metal matting, and he needed metal matting out there because otherwise when it rained, the ground turned into a quagmire. But on this day, it was like 40 odd degrees. So 40 odd degrees is lying on metal matting, admittedly with the covering down so he didn't burn himself, underneath a hot metal vehicle in really dusty conditions, fixing this vehicle. And I remember running past and going, God, do you know what? Thank God you're doing that. Because if you weren't doing that, I might have to do that. And A, I wouldn't have a clue what I'm doing. And B, it looks really uncomfortable work. And then I started to think about other elements of our organisation. I started thinking about, you know, thank God we got these chefs working with us, because they're in a tent in 40+ degrees heat. If you've ever been camping, you know how hot tents get. And they've got 12 gas burners on full chat making food for 200-300 people. Yeah, thank God they're doing that. And then I realised other people would look at me and my job and go, thank God he's doing that, and thank God that person's doing that. And we all had our own various challenges throughout this operational deployment. But we did our best, obviously, to make sure that despite all the differences we had, we connected as a unit. And fairly early on, we had a rugby match between the UK element and the Afghan National Army, and there's a picture of it there. And it was just a brilliant way to sort of break the ice, you know, show that language barriers and cultural barriers didn't matter, that we were all involved and all willing to put our best in. And what we started to notice after a few weeks was we started going around going, God, you know, some of the people around here are more 4-5 commando than 4-5 commando. By which we meant, you know, some of our Army attachments or our RAF attachments, they were going to our little unit shop where we sold things like, well, unit emblazoned and things, you know, and they were buying 4-5 commando towels, 4-5 commando t-shirts, 4-5 commando baseball caps, 4-5 commando flip-flops. Great for us because it meant we had more money to spend on facilities in our camp when we got home. But it was amazing how proud they were to be part of our 4-5 commando setup, even though they weren't actually Royal Marines. And this unifying culture came around partly because we were so values orientated. It didn't matter where you came from. It didn't matter what your background was. It didn't particularly matter what uniform you wore or anything else. So long as you delivered those values, excellence, integrity, self-discipline, not to cut corners and do the right thing, and humility. So long as you lived those, you were part of our club. And your problems are our problems, because if you had a problem, it meant you couldn't do the things we needed you to do. And if you couldn't do the things you needed to do, then we had a wider problem. So everyone was really motivated and bought into this delivering excellence. No one wanted to be the part of the organization that let the rest of it down. So everyone worked really hard to deliver excellence, to achieve these really high levels of motivation. And because of that, they felt included. And because they felt included and motivated, we achieved high performance. So as an indication of, well, okay, what did you achieve then? We were there to provide security. And during that operational tour, one of our elements didn't fire a single shot in anger for the entire 7 months. Now, if you're there to provide security, that is a massive tick in the box of success. We started to get lots of interest from high-level military people as well. We even had General Petraeus come and visit us towards the end, sort of midway towards the end point of this tour, to start going, look, what are you guys doing that's delivering such success? So the head of all the international security forces in Afghanistan came to visit us and to find out what we were doing. When we got back, there was a symposium held at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst to look at counterinsurgency operations and how were things going in Afghanistan and what we were learning. And ultimately, the tour with 4-5 Commando was held up as a case study in terms of, look, this is how you do counterinsurgency operations well. You know, that absolutely smashed it out of the park. So we achieved some really notable successes. And as I say, my view is we did that because what mattered was the values by which we operated. And by delivering those values, everyone was included. Everyone was determined to deliver their best and achieve excellence. And so we achieved high performance. So I wanted to talk now a little bit more about, okay, so what does this mean in practice, and start thinking about, well, how can we and others potentially implement some of the things we learned? So I thought I'd start by going, well, let's just have a quick discussion around leadership. So you've got a little diagram here. We've got level of motivation on the left-hand side, you know, lower at the bottom, more at the top, and you've got time from left to right down at the bottom. And so at any one time, you might have a leader come in and go, you know, this brilliant explosion of inspiration and motivation, and they give this great speech, this great rallying cry to the wider organization. Everyone's there going, yeah, absolutely, I buy into this vision. It's amazing. I love what he's setting out, feeling energized, and we're all high-fiving people, or whatever we might do when we get energized and pumped. And that's brilliant. And certainly initially, levels of motivation might increase for a little bit even, but then after time, what can happen without further intervention is that the daily grind bites, the things that cause frictions in people's day-to-day experience in that environment start to hit home. And what the leadership said in their brilliant inspirational speech doesn't tally with people's lived experience day to day, and levels of that experience can start dragging down people's levels of motivation. And so without the leadership coming back in and consistently giving this motivational and inspiring speech to try and bring levels back up, levels of motivation, despite what's said, despite the lines and the words spoken by the leadership, the levels of motivation across the organization may or may not tally. I mean, Nick, I don't know if you've ever experienced something similar in your career to date.
Yeah, I mean, quite often I've come across situations where, as you say, the leader will come in and think that all they've got to do is outline some impressive company vision, and then they wander away for coffee and biscuits in the boardroom, and leave the staff sort of looking at each other, wondering, well, how do we achieve that? So yeah, you often see that disconnect between leadership and sort of day-to-day operational management. I think that leaves a lot of companies.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's definitely a space for inspirational leadership, as it's generally known, or visionary leadership, but it's only a part, right? And so what I'm really keen to explore is, well, okay, so what are some of the other things we can do? So we can come in and we can tell everyone what our values are and what we're aspiring to. That's brilliant, but that's not the whole picture if you want to achieve high levels of motivation and therefore high performance. So we're going to explore 3 areas through the rest of this session, and we're going to explore things relating to environment, we're going to explore processes, and then we're going to have a quick look at behaviors and culture, and then we'll sort of start wrapping it up. So taking the first one first, looking at environment, I'm going to bring out something called hygiene and motivation factors. Now, this relates to a theory that was developed by this guy, Frederick Herzberg, writing in 1959. Now, he actually served in the Second World War, but he became fascinated by, you know, what motivates people, what drives us to achieve, even in some of the most testing environments we can encounter. Now, I know there might be some people out there going, 1959, that's ages ago. That's so not contemporary. Well, yeah, fair one, but, you know, Newtonian physics still works. So for me, it's not about when someone did their work. It's, does this stuff true, and is it applicable in the workplace? Can we use it? And I definitely think this is a theory that is really useful. Now, some theories people might find difficult to adapt to their workplace, but I think that, as I say, this is one that actually, when you start thinking about it, is really quite straightforward. It gets you to ask questions like, well, do we have a leader like this one? You know, Meryl Streep in Devil Wears Prada. Quite combative, quite difficult, and can wear down motivation over time, for sure. Or do we have a leader like this one, Serena Weigman? And, you know, she's achieved some amazing successes, not just with the England women's football team, but in pretty much most teams she's coached and managed. And so she's done an amazing job for developing high levels of inclusion and motivation and delivering consistent high performance. But it doesn't necessarily just need to be about people. But it might also be something that's even more tangible than looking at people. It might be stuff like this. Is the equipment we're getting our people to use stuff like that old, antiquated, unreliable, difficult to use? Or actually, when we're asking people to go away and do work, is their workstation like that? Now, if my workstation looked like that, I'd be delighted. You know, I'd absolutely probably spend more time in my office than I do currently. And I actually had this example in our own business. You know, my business partner, Simon, this was last year. You know, I knew his laptop was old and he was having loads of problems with it, and the space bar didn't work properly and the blue wheel would spin around for ages. And so I thought, we just asked Simon to produce a load of course content. I thought he must be there in the morning with his cup of tea and his marmalade on toast going, oh, I've got to go upstairs and write all that course content. And probably in about 3 hours, I'll get maybe an hour and a half's worth of work done. And I thought, well, that can't be very motivating first thing in the morning with your marmalade on toast and your tea. So we bought Simon a new laptop. And sure enough, when I said, oh, you know, have you got your new laptop? How's it going? He said, oh, it's brilliant. Yeah, you know. And so he's there now with his marmalade on toast and cup of tea in the morning going, oh, I've got to go upstairs and do some work. But I know in 3 hours, I'm going to produce 3 hours of really good stuff. So motivation theory and hygiene factors are these kind of considerations. It's things like, what equipment am I giving people to do stuff with? And we'll look at some other examples now. So here's basically a table of some of the factors Frederick Hertzberg identified. So you got hygiene factors there on the left column. And that's stuff like, are we paying people properly? What's the remuneration package? Policies, we'll come on to policies in a moment. Professional relationships, quality supervision, job security. Do people feel like they've got a job, or actually do they feel like, you know, their job is hanging in the balance? What are the working conditions like? You know, if people have a breakout room where there's a leak in the roof, the toilet seat's not really fixed on, keeps coming off, the fridge doesn't work, the kettle sometimes works, maybe doesn't, it's cold and damp, that's not going to make people feel valued and motivated particularly. So it's important we consider all these hygiene factors, the things that, you know, frustrate people and that people feel means that they're not valued. We find out what they are, we identify them, and we address them. And then you have the motivational factors. You know, do people get a sense of achievement, fulfillment from their work? Do they have the professional relationships where actually they like coming to work? They look forward to it. Do they feel they get recognition and value from the work they do? And do they feel they can develop? Because most people do want to go to work to achieve the next rung or the next step in their progression and grow. You know, personal growth is important. So looking at hygiene and motivation factors, you know, hygiene factors are things that pull us back in terms of our levels of motivation. Motivation factors are the things that drive us forward. And ideally, if we can address all the hygiene factors and get rid of anything reducing our motivation and put in place as many motivation factors as we can, we get a well-motivated workforce. And so if we've got values like excellence, well, great, let's make sure people have excellent kit and an excellent working environment. If we've got stuff in there saying we really value our people, well, let's make sure we've got an environment that shows people we really value our people. So values should come out in consideration of hygiene and motivation factors. So that's stuff to do with environment.
Just before you move on, Dick, there's an interesting comment in the chat. Somebody quoted Colin Powell saying that perpetual optimism can act as a force multiplier. So that's almost the leader who's sort of continuously positive. You might see the question on the screen there. So what would you say is more important, continually positive, or, you know, considering the hygiene factors that you're talking about?
I think it's got to be both. I mean, optimism is about the future is going to be better, right? So even if you identify hygiene factors, things that aren't great now, the optimistic leader will say, right, yeah, but we're going to make it better. So we're going to make this better. We're going to improve your motivational factors. So absolutely, anyone can come in and complain about the staff break room. That's it. Yeah, we can all do that. But the optimistic leader is the one that addresses that to say, yeah, I know it's not great, guys, but leave it with me, and we're going to fix it. We're going to make it better. So it tallies absolutely with the cheerfulness in the face of adversity, the element of commando spirit that we had. So as a Royal Marine, I absolutely take optimism very seriously. I think it is important to say anyone can easily take shots from the sideline and say that's not any good. The optimistic leader is the one that provides the rallying cry and spurs people on to say yes, so we're going to make it better. But it's a great point. And we'll come on to some leadership stuff actually in a couple of slides' time. What I'd like to move on to now is to explore things around what many people consider the boring stuff, but I consider it anything but the boring stuff. And this is relating to policies. Now, it took me a couple of years to figure out how important policies were. And yet this is something that I encounter as overlooked all the time. So I'll give you some examples. If we work in an organization that says we empower our people and we trust them to do their job because our people know best, well, that's brilliant. But if the policy that people have to work through is, yeah, in order to do this, you need to complete this form and get sign off from this person, this person, and this person. Well, how has that empowered them? I've not empowered them to make a decision. I've actually removed that decision from them and split it up between 3 other people, and they've got to go around chasing signatures. We might have a policy or a value that says we are customer led as an organization, and we absolutely put in the customer's user experience first. Okay, well then how might that tally with an organization that says we've got 30 working days to respond to a customer inquiry, like 6 weeks to respond to a customer inquiry? How is that customer led? Surely something like we will respond to customer inquiries within 24 hours or something is a much better indication of a policy that aligns to the value of customer led. So we see it all the time where the leadership will come in, you know, this big visionary thing, this is what we're about as an organization, and the daily grind, the policies that actually departments then have to go away and adhere to in their day-to-day work do not align with the values that the leadership are espousing. So that can cause a couple of issues. One, it can cause obviously frustration amongst the wider organization, going, this isn't my experience. We keep coming in and saying with this, but that's not my experience. And the other potential danger is it can make the leadership team look really disingenuous. You know, how can you keep coming in and saying this is what we are as an organization, and yet you don't seem to recognize this is what we're having to put up with within our various departments? So either you don't know this is what's going on, which then you probably should, or you do know it's going on, but you're not doing anything about it, which then looks really disingenuous. So either way, it's incredibly important when it comes to values-based leadership that we don't just trot out a line about what our values have got and what they mean to us, but we embed those values in the policies and procedures that we're asking our people to abide by. And as I say, it's one of the most often overlooked elements, I think, of values-based leadership. People focus on the visionary stuff and the great words and often miss the attention to detail of, yeah, but what am I actually asking people to do when the leaders walk back out the room? So it's really important to get right. And when it comes to policy as well, there's a couple of key considerations is language. And I, for one, definitely wish I'd paid more attention to English language when I was at school. But you got an example there of the difference a comma can make to a sentence, to a meaning of say, let's eat grandpa, as in grandpa's going to get eaten, or let's eat grandpa, more of an invitation to come and dine with us. And I've definitely, I can remember a clear case where I'd accidentally missed out the word not from a sentence. And so I'd inadvertently instructed people in a document to do the very thing I didn't want them to do. And someone had to, I think you've missed the word not out. I was like, oh, yeah, I have. So I was basically telling people to do the opposite of what I wanted. So it's really important when we're writing policies, we really do pay attention to, how are we phrasing this? Does it say what I think it says? And another common pitfall with policy is that if you're not careful, you might inadvertently discriminate between groups. So you might write a policy and you might name a specific group, so if this scenario happens, the sales team will, or the compliance department will. And so straight away, I've started to single out groups that are either going to benefit from something or have to do extra work, whatever it might be. But you've got to be really careful there, because potentially that starts drawing us and them. So let's say, a policy says, yeah, they're right, the sales team bonus policy, if the sales team achieve this, they get this bonus. Well, that's brilliant. But unless you've got another bonus policy somewhere that says how every other department can possibly achieve a bonus, you've potentially drawn a line now between sales teams that can double their remuneration and no one else even has the opportunity to strive for better. So we have to be really careful when we're putting policies together to make sure we're being fair, not just to the people the policy might apply to, but to the organization as a whole. So some common pitfalls around policy. So I say it's really important. The key point there is it's really important not just that we say what our values are, but we make sure those values are embedded in the policies and procedures we ask people to adhere to. So moving now to look at
just on that, Nick.
Sorry.
How important do you think it is for leaders to embody the values that they're espousing to the rest of the organisation?
Oh, that's a brilliant segue into my next slide. So, so I'll hopefully answer that in the next slide. So we'll go on to the leadership stuff, and this is the stuff most people get really excited about. And if you go on LinkedIn, you'll see loads of stuff on it because people find this far more interesting than reviewing policies and looking at the fine detail. But the best line I ever heard on leadership was from this guy. He was my boss for a period, and he said, "The most important thing a leader can do is to set the tone, but there's just one catch: you don't get to choose when you set the tone." And I thought this was a fantastic line because, yes, we can come in and tell everyone what the values are, but we then have to make sure we live to those values and adhere to them in everything we do. And the more senior leadership position you're in, the more people are watching you. The more people look to you for setting the example of what's appropriate and what's right and what's not. So, in this case, it's how you come in and greet the security guard in the office in the morning. It's how you respond when you're on a busy work call to meet an urgent deadline and the cleaner knocks on the door to say, "Can I just empty your bin?" It's how you respond when someone in a meeting that you would have thought would have done something hasn't. Do you fly off the handle and berate them in public, or do you calmly say, "Okay, well, let's chat about this later, but what can we do to get over this right now?" It's all those little interactions. You are setting the tone for what acceptable behavior is and is not. So if you talk a great game on respecting and valuing others, but then you don't respect people in a public meeting, or you don't respect the contribution various teams in your business are making, you make a mockery of the very values you're asking people to adhere to. So it's really important as a leader that we are more conscious of the way we behave all the time. Now, a key part of this, and I'm really quite passionate about this topic, is we, as a leader, we have to have courage. For me, courage is the most important attribute of any leader because so much else depends on it. So we need to stand up for what is right, and we need to have courage to do that. And that means being willing to call out behaviors and actions that we don't think are aligned to our values. Now, I know from experience, the first time we have to do this as leaders, it is difficult. Certainly for me, there was a physiological response. My stomach got tight and my pulse probably went up. And certainly I felt a bit more tense when I realized I was going to have to go over and talk to some people who, were 10, 15 years more experienced than me, but I was the one in a leadership position. And I knew that if I didn't call out that behavior that wasn't values aligned, no one else will. And the standard you walk by is the standard you accept. So I did call these people out and say, "Look, guys, I don't think that's appropriate. I think you need to curb that. And we can come and chat about it in my office later if you wish," sort of thing. Now, those guys might have felt a bit miffed that they were called out and held to account, but everyone watching that would have probably been relieved. Thank God someone said something, and if I wasn't going to say it, who else was, quite frankly. But what that does over time, the more people around the organization see the leadership stand in and hold people to account for values, you know what the magical thing is? They start holding each other to account for the values. Well, I've seen the boss do that, so I know if I do it, I'm going to have the support of the boss because I am just reflecting and mirroring their behavior. So the more we stand up for what is right and call out behavior that's not aligned with our values, the more we encourage to the wider organization to hold each other to account. And we end up having to do those interventions less because people just learn what the right behaviors are. Courage for me does something else as well, which is equally important. And courage is all about building authenticity and trust. So what do I mean by that? The guy on the left in that picture is Brigadier Slim, and he commanded the British Army in Burma. And he said a great line on leadership: "It's just plain you." Now, that's for me is fantastic. And another great line here was from Aristotle, who's the guy on the right, said, "Know thyself." Knowing yourself and who you are, and therefore who you should be as a leader, as Slim was implying, does take courage to look inwards to go, okay, what are my strengths and weaknesses? And I don't think it's a bad thing to say we've got weaknesses. In fact, I think it's a really strong thing to go, do you know what, there are certain things I'm just not that good at. I wish I was like that person over there, but I'm not. And that's okay. I wish I was really good and as good as them at that thing, but I'm not, and that's okay. But it's really important we do have the courage to reflect inward and go, okay, what am I good at? What am I not so good at? And if I'm not good at that, I've got a couple of options then. One, I know that they're the things I should potentially try and work on over time. But in the meantime, what I should do is make sure I've got people in my team and around me that can mitigate the things I'm not so great at. And that means when a certain scenario happens, I go, oh, yeah, it's one of these situations, which isn't my strong point. Yeah, hey, Anne, I want you to deliver this thing because this is perfect for you, really well suited to your strengths. So could you deliver that? And if you need any support from me, come and let me know. That way, what that enables us to do is it means we don't have to pretend to be good at stuff we're not. And your team know when you're trying to be good at something you're not. You don't have to be good at everything. And the more you're comfortable with being just good at the stuff you're good at, and you own that and you drive that forward, and the team recognize that their job is to support you on the other stuff, that enables you to be really authentic in terms of how you lead people. And when you're authentic as a leader, you build trust. And that's key to enabling motivation and inclusion. And again, then when you're calling people out in terms of values-based leadership, people know that's being genuine. You're not masking. You're being true to your organization, and your values are aligned to the organization's values. And that's really powerful when it comes across. The other bit about leadership, just coming back to the point on tone, really, we mentioned it with policy, and I mentioned it with this as well, is the importance of language yet again. The words we use in leadership positions have a real impact and real power to affect people. And I did a podcast with a guy recently, actually, and he was telling me a story of how he was in a group, fairly informal setting, and he had a good relationship with most people in the group. And one person said something, and he sort of gave an off-the-cuff remark, and he said, with anyone else in that group, it would have been fine. But I kind of forgot that this was one person I didn't quite have the same relationship with. And he said it really impacted them, and it took months to sort of try and recover that relationship. And it's really important we recognize the fact that the words we use matter. I had another session with someone recently. They were telling me a story about how they did a brief to their boss, and the boss said, oh, that's brilliant. I've been waiting 2 years for someone to give me a brief that good. Well, lovely for them. But obviously the words everyone else heard was, well, so for 2 years, you've not rated any of the work we've done. So unthinking moment maybe, but the words we use have a real impact on those around us. And it's really important to recognize that. So again, if we've got values like respect and valuing others in there, well, let's make sure that the words we use respect and value others. If we've got words like we collaborate, well, let's make sure the words we use are collaborative and not competitive or seeking to blame. So again, the values we use should inform the language we use, because the language we use sets the tone. And the most important thing a leader can do is set the tone. And we need to make sure it's a values aligned tone if we're going to get high levels of motivation, inclusion, and high performance.
There's another question in the comments section, Nick, asking about, what can the leader do to motivate themselves if their motivation takes a dip in order to carry this process, carry it on?
It's a great question. Certainly for me, I mean, this is maybe a skill I've developed over time, is reflection. I have become, I think, through my career, really reflective, and I do think about things either I've done or that I'm going to do a lot, and that helps me a lot. And sometimes it's just useful to go away and think about stuff and talk myself through it. Sometimes, obviously, that's not an option, and if that's certainly early in my career, I wasn't as good at it. And then I think one of the best ways is find mentors. Is a great tip. Find people that you really rate, that will be honest and have your best interests at heart, to help you develop that ability, to give you that honest reflection, when to hold up a mirror to yourself and say, look, this is what we see in you. So mentors can be really powerful if you can find them. And if you can't find someone to be a mentor, then maybe just ask a trusted friend or even family. But trying to find some sort of external opinion can be very powerful if you're not comfortable with self-reflecting yet. I hope that answers that one. What I'll do now is I just want to move on to a bit of a cautionary tale, really, because I love values-based leadership, and it can be some great things. And this is all about achieving high levels of motivation. But there is sort of other considerations you need to have. So for several years in my military career, I worked with special forces. Now, these are undoubtedly fantastic operators, and without doubt some of the most capable people you could ever come across. But what's really interesting when you're doing special forces operations is that sometimes to put a handful of people behind enemy lines or to do whatever operation they need to do, you still need a whole load of other people to make that work. You still need mechanics whose their specialist skill set is making sure the vehicles aren't going to break down when we need them to work, so we can get get out of trouble, basically. So we still need those. We still need specialist communications operators who can make sure that they can call for backup or call in support or give updates so that people know where they are and how to get them out of trouble if they need it. We still need logisticians to make sure that the right equipment is in the right place at the right time and is in good working order when they need it. We still need even things like chefs, when you're making sure you're sustaining people over a decent time period, many miles from home. We still need people that can put food together to make sure everyone is sustained. You might even need a ship. Now, a ship might have 100, 200 people on board as the ship's company. So that's another 200 people you need just for one ship to enable an operation. And obviously, we might need things like helicopters, in which case I need the air crew, I need the ground crew, and I need a whole load of other enablers to maintain and refuel and service a helicopter. So for any small operation with just a handful of special forces guys, you might need 200-300 people in the background enabling it, some deployed in another country, some might be back in the UK. But to make that work, you need a huge amount of enablers in the background. And if you take any one of those away, the operation is more likely to fall over and not succeed. So occasionally, though, what seems to be a risk that would occasionally occur is that special forces might have a tendency to think that they are, and I'm generalizing, I don't mean to, but there was a risk that special forces, some elements of it, started thinking they were better than everyone else. Oh, you can't come to this because you're not special forces. And that occasionally became quite harmful, because then it starts to say, well, do you mean we're not as valued as anyone else is? Now, don't get me wrong. Obviously, as I say, special forces are some of the best people you can operate, bar none. They are exceptional. And I have no issue with the team claiming that they are the best and believing they are the best, because that's brilliant for motivation. But I'd always add in one caveat. You can absolutely have a team that can be the best, but they're the best at what they do. It doesn't mean then that anyone else isn't the best vehicle mechanic or the best communicator or the best logistician or the best ship's company in the Navy or whatever else. So I actually did come across a business where they had a similar issue with their sales team. The sales team were going, oh, we are the lifeblood of this company. We're the one that brings the business in. We're the ones, to make sure everyone's got a job. Yeah, but that's fine. But, if you don't have an accounts department calling in the invoices to actually make sure the money lands, if you don't have, the warehouse guys making sure that actually what you sell then gets delivered, if you don't have sort of the HR department making sure everyone gets paid on time or promoted or whatever it might be, if you don't have marketing letting people know that there's a service out there to be sold, the organization will suffer. The sales team's job will get harder. So actually, when it comes to values-based leadership, the values apply to every part of your organization. Linking it back to the deployment to Afghanistan, we had elements from all over the military. We had non-military elements. We had Afghanistan elements. And it didn't matter where people came from. What bound us were the values that enabled us to deliver our job. And it's the same in any organization. It doesn't matter which department you're in. You can be the best department at doing your department's job, absolutely. But as long as the other departments are delivering in line with the same values, they're just as good as you are. And that level of humility, I think, is really important to get values-based leadership to work.
Just on that, Nick, there's a comment that's been put in the chat asking the question: if you get someone who insists on believing that they're superior to other team members, what can you do as a leader? Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's a great question. I kind of feel as though it's difficult to answer. It depends on the context so much, but that's definitely not helpful. So my questions here are: well, are these people superior to us, or are they not superior to us? Let's say a team member feels superior to the team leader. Okay, it's a good question. The team leader really has to kind of step in a little bit. It's going to cause tension if people who aren't the team leader try to intervene and say, look, you know better. That's quite difficult, because then, why should this person listen? They're potentially going to say, well, who are you to tell me what to do? So the team leader potentially is going to have to step up. If the team leader doesn't have that skill set, going back to, look, maybe they're just not very good at managing that kind of conflict or ego, then they might have to get someone else to step in. But that person should ideally be someone who is senior to the team member who thinks they're superior, because you need to use the weight that additional authority has in order to be able to deal with that ego. I think if the person is just not going to respond and constantly be disruptive, then arguably you're gusting into performance management territory. I'd start. sort of have a stab in the dark on. But it's a brilliant question, but the answer is not straightforward. But as I say, it's yeah. If you want if you want to send me a message separately, then I'd happily maybe pick that one up if we can have more details. But I'll start wrapping up now, because this is a CMI event. I'm keen to explore, what does this have to do with the Everyone Economy? So the Everyone Economy is a CMI's campaign. Hopefully, if you're watching this, you know about it. About everyone contributing to the best of their ability, no matter what part of society we come from, to deliver the best possible outcome for the UK and the UK economy, or indeed whichever country we're part of. And so, as part of that campaign, the CMI recommends a number of considerations. Ask yourself challenging questions, pay attention to the answers. Absolutely good tip. Recognise the central role of all managers, not just EDI specialists, to deliver inclusion and so therefore increase levels of motivation, high performance. Absolutely. Put together a plan and track your progress. Absolutely. Be a storyteller, a role model, and embrace flexible working. That's all good stuff. But what I'd say is also, if it comes to values-based leadership being something that can tie everyone together and value everyone equally because they're delivering to the same values in terms of how they operate, then we might want to consider some of the stuff we've highlighted in this discussion. So review where necessary, address the hygiene and motivation factors that we see can be improved. And if you don't know what they are, by the way, top tip, ask your team. My experience says that most of the time when you ask your team what could be done better, they're pretty forward-leaning and telling you quite quickly. So if you don't know, just ask. Listen to people's experience of companies' policies and lead change where you need to. Again, your team are usually very willing to tell you which policies and procedures they find really difficult and frustrating. I think it's really important we're more aware of the language we use. And I can't emphasize this enough. We set the tone, right? And we set the tone in all these little exchanges we have, be it off the cuff remarks, emails we send, what we write out in policy documents, whatever it might be. But we need to be far more aware of the language we use and how that might impact the reader. Having the courage to speak out against poor behavior is really difficult. Maybe this relates to the previous question, actually, about someone being superior. Maybe it is something, if that organization has values, you can say, is that really aligned to the values or not? Might be some safe ground to call people out on. Reflect regularly and honestly and identify how we can be a better leader. As I say, for me, this is a skill I learned over a couple of decades now. I think I'm better at it than I was, certainly. But self-reflection, I think, is a really powerful tool to get us to objectively look at the fact that, am I operating in line with the values of my organisation or not? That instruction I've just written to my team, is that in line with the values we've written or not? The behaviour that I'm accepting from my team, is that aligned to the values or not? Just ask yourselves these questions regularly. And the more you do it and intervene on the back of your conclusions, the more your team will start self-policing. And you will deliver high levels of motivation. People will feel more included, and you will be able to achieve high performance. So that's the end of my bit, and I'd love to discuss some more questions.
Well, thank you so much for that, Nick. The themes you touched on, they reflect in my own principles and the principles I've applied in my own, the various shades of my career over the past however many decades. The idea that as a leader you need to continually self-reflect. The point you stop looking in the mirror and asking questions about yourself, I think, is the point that you start to believe that it's all about you. And
and it's another one to say where courage comes out, because we all still make mistakes. I still make some mistakes, and it's important that when I look in the mirror, I go, yeah, do you know what? I still didn't get that right. And again, it takes a bit of courage to admit to yourself your own failings. It's really important. So there's no point looking in the mirror if you're never going to accept the fact you might have made a mistake. You've got to be ready to look in the mirror and go, yeah, do you know what? Probably could have done that better. And if you don't do that, looking in the mirror is kind of a moot exercise, really.
There was another question I saw in the chat about asking the question about how can we get some of the values you're talking about better embedded into this country's education system? Because obviously there's a sense from the person who wrote that comment that that's something that's missing at the moment. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we're almost straying into politics a bit, but I'm keen to answer every question. The education system is really difficult. I'm not massively au fait with it, but obviously we have the national curriculum, and that sets out in a lot of cases exactly what a lot of education providers need to be delivering. And so that straight away puts a bit of a constraint around us. We have to operate within whatever the national curriculum sets out. But where it might then come into practice is, okay, so despite the national curriculum being that, how are we actually implementing that? How are we delivering that in the policies and procedures in place in the school? How are we delivering that in terms of the tone and the language we use when things are actually taught in the classroom? All that stuff, I think, needs to be considered far more. And obviously then there's a question of, well, which values in particular do you want embedded in the education system? Is it the Royal Marines values, or is it some other values? Each school, in my experience, each school tends to have its own set of core values that they have, usually broadly similar, but each school has its own set of core values. So the answers to those questions in terms of, well, therefore, what should our policies and processes be, or what sort of language and tone should we use in the classroom, will relate back to those schools' values that they say this is how we do teaching within this school, framed within these values.
In terms of the multicultural aspect of a number of teams, there's again a question in the comments about how would you position this when you've got a multicultural team? You've touched on that in your presentation with all of the different elements that supported the commando in Afghanistan, but is there anything from that particular perspective that you could reflect on?
One of the reasons I really like values-based leadership is like I say, it's kind of background agnostic. It doesn't matter what people's background is in terms of their cultural background or their heritage or their religious beliefs or whatever else it might be. So long as you are applying these values, then that works. So the really important thing here is excuse me if you can hear my dog barking. The really important thing here is that everyone sees the person leading that team to be adhering those values to everyone, no matter who it is. It doesn't matter whether the leader gets on with the person or not. As long as that person is delivering to these values, great. Doesn't matter whether someone comes from one part of the world or a different one. So long as everyone delivers to these values, great. The more people see that, they know what's expected of them, and that's fair. And they see that everyone's being treated in the same way. So actually cultural issues then disappear. It's not a factor. The factor that matters is, are you delivering aligned to these values or not? So in order to generate that perception, the leader has to start making sure those values are visible. So maybe the question is, how can the leadership and the team at large make sure these values are visible? Well, that's actually, again, fairly straightforward. Start using the values in meetings, start using the values with each other. I can remember countless conversations where I was challenged and I would challenge other people going, yeah, come on, is that excellence? If we go down that route, is that aspiring for excellence, or is that taking the easy option? Is that just cutting corners? Is this self-discipline? Is this making sure we're doing everything properly? Or is this, again, just trying to take the easy option to save a bit of time? Or, yeah, come on, mate, integrity, actually, was that what happened? Well, yeah, okay, no, I suppose actually, if I was going to be really truthful about it, it was more like this. Right, okay, so actually the problem's not that, which we could have wasted 2 hours on. The problem's actually this thing over here. Yeah, okay, right. So you can start using the values as essentially almost sort of code words for polite and respectful challenge amongst the team. And the more you do it, the more the team get used to then, as I say, self-policing. They'll start asking themselves these questions before they put their recommendation forward. Oh, is this right? If I put this forward, is someone just going to say that's not courageous, or that's not respectful or valuing of others, or that's not empowering people, or that's not customer-led? So the more we can use the values in our language as a metric by which we assess the work we do and the decisions we make, the more people will get used to doing that independently.
I'm conscious that we had a number of questions submitted before today, so I'd like to ask some of those, if I may, Nick. We had a question from Julian. Can we finally say goodbye to KPIs, which achieve nothing but enabling box-ticking managers to do their job, and rely solely on values-based leadership and management?
It's a great question.
Nice short question.
Julian, yeah. Well, unfortunately, the answer for me is sorry, absolutely not. First, I'm really sorry to hear that your experience of KPIs is very negative. But I do think they're really important, but almost particularly when it comes to values-based leadership. One question I might have, given that's your view, is I wonder whether your organisation's using KPIs properly. Because what key performance indicators are, there's measures of progress, right? That's targets and stuff. And then there's measures of, but how are we delivering those targets? And for me, that's where KPIs come in. And that's the stuff that should be aligned with values. Yeah, well done. We've achieved, record new members in our organization this month. Yeah, but are you measuring how many you're losing at the bottom? Because unless you're measuring, all you're measuring is that your sales team are brilliant, but people are completely disillusioned with what you're delivering, so they're not renewing. Or, yeah, we've achieved X amount of calls this month. Yeah, but how many of those calls have resulted in satisfied customers? Because if I've just got a target to deal with so many calls this month, but actually I've got 80% of those are people who give me 1 star on Trustpilot, like, we have not delivered excellence. So for me, KPIs should be measuring how we're achieving the targets. Achieving the targets is one thing. How have we done it? Are we still operating in line with our values or not is really important. And that's, for me, is what KPIs should be managing, or should be measuring, sorry. So no, I'd hopefully KPIs don't get thrown out if we switch to values-based leadership. They're really important to let us know whether we're delivering to those values or not.
Thanks, Nick. Another question from Neil. As our understanding of operating in values-based environment matures, are we evolving closer to morals and ethics?
Yeah, great question. Obviously, hopefully we're never too far away, but I can absolutely understand the sentiment that, yes, sometimes people or businesses have got a bit lost in terms of morals and ethics. For me, there's a really close link. When I do strategy development with companies and we talk about values as part of, what are the values of your organization? Because that should impact how you're going to deliver your strategy. I always put values in one column, and then in the column next to it have ethics. And what I try to get people to do is go, right, so if these are your values, what does each one say about how we should behave as a business? And that's the ethical part for me. So yes, I do think there is a natural conversation when you really start unpicking values-based leadership in terms of, well, what does that mean for the ethical standards of behavior that we should embed within our business, that we should adhere to? So hopefully, yes, the more people start getting interested in values-based leadership and applying it, the more they will have these discussions and considerations about what that means for ethics.
Thanks, Nick. Another question, this time from Jennifer. In order to conduct values-based leadership, is there anything we can do to keep practicing it to ensure one is living it?
Yeah, well, I think we've kind of touched a bit on this already. Is regularly reflect, and we've maybe focused a lot on reflecting on ourselves individually, but maybe at a more organizational level, this is regularly reflecting on, review your policies and processes regularly. This policy and process was right years ago, but look, everyone's working from home now. So if we're going to allow working from home and do that in line with our values, do we need to adjust our policy and processes, as an example? So again, there just needs to be these regular review points and honest considerations around, are the frameworks we're putting in place still aligned to values? It's another good, really top tip, and I really like it when businesses are already doing this, is build the values into your appraisal process and performance management, because then I can hold people to account to the values formally as part of their appraisals process. And so then that can make sure that they align their behaviors, because if they want to get promoted, if they want whatever else, then their performance is going to be assessed on the extent to which they set the tone, going back to that phrase, through the behaviors they conduct themselves by in their day-to-day business. And then it gives the line manager an opportunity to discuss with them in a really nice, objective, non-emotional way, because it's not the line manager's opinion. It's the appraisal process saying, look, you're going to be assessed by these values. So let's have a talk about how you've managed to deliver and align to these values over the last 6 months. So that can be another really top tip as well.
Okay. Another question from the chat, Nick, was about change in leadership. The question was basically, what can you do as a leader to come in and pick up a situation where motivation levels are low?
It's really good. Well, step one, find out why they're low. It could be for a whole host of reasons. It could be there might be a leadership problem in that specific team. It might be that there's a people problem in that team. It might be one or two individuals in that team who are not behaving in a way that's conducive to motivating everyone else. It might be policy and process issues. It might be the fact that they feel sort of undervalued compared to other parts of the business. So step one is to understand what is causing the demotivation. Going back to the Frederick Hertzberg and his hygiene factors and motivation factors. What's an issue that's present that shouldn't be, or what should be present but isn't. And then once you start identifying that, then obviously you can start addressing it. But it does take leadership, proactive leadership intervention. You can't just go, oh, that team appear a bit down. Right. Okay. Yeah. So are we leaders or not? Are we gonna take ownership of this issue or not? Are we gonna step in there and help them or not? Well, of course we are, because we're leaders. So we're gonna go in and we're gonna ask them. Now, again, depending on what the issue is, you might need to be careful about how you do that. Do I ask them in a public forum? Do I just try and call someone in on a one-to-one basis to go, look, can you give me a bit of a heads up as to what might be going on here? That's a judgment call you have to make as a leader. But step one is understand. You've got to understand what's going on before you can decide how to act. But when you do find out what's going on, have a look back at, again, the sort of motivation factors, the hygiene factors, and see what needs fixing.
You've in our previous conversations, you've given me a really good example of that type of behaviour, and I just wondered if you share it with people. It's the one where you had to load stores.
Yeah. So we still 4 or 5 commando again, actually, and we'd gone to Norway as part of a big deployment. So several hundred. Well, actually, it was a wider deployment. Thousands of troops went to Norway, and we came back on one of the naval ships. We came alongside up near Edinburgh, and we had to get all our stuff off the ship and onto a truck, and then head back to our camp. And in getting the stores off, a couple of officers had given direction to the guys, right, we need all this stuff loaded onto that truck, go. And we were under a time constraint. Everyone wanted to get back so they could clear down and then go on some well-earned leave, because we'd all been away for a few months by that point. And all the officers were like, well, don't want to get involved and interrupt what the guys are doing. So the officers sort of stayed out of the way. But I was sort of stood to one side watching it, and you could see that the guys were they'd had enough. They'd been away for a long time, been cooped up on a ship for a week and a half on the way back, or however long it was. And they just wanted to get back, clear the stuff, and go home and see their families. And as a result of this, they would just throw in stuff onto this truck any old how. And after they'd loaded about a third, and I could see how much was left, and I was just thinking, they're never going to get all that on there. And I was not the most senior person stood around, so I was kind of looking around going, is anyone else going to no? And so no one did. So in the end, I was like, right, so I'll step in. So I stepped in and said, right, lads, really sorry, but you're going to have to take everything off. Take it all off, and we'll start this again. So this time when they loaded it, I was up on the truck myself, and I was putting stuff away, and I was saying, no, not that there, put that like that so we can fit more stuff in. And if you put like that, we can put some stuff on top of it. And so I got involved and had far more input, basically, and provided far more direction. And what was interesting, almost a year later, I was chatting to some of the guys and said, do you know, we know you're a good boss. We knew you were a good boss when that time when we were loading the stores, you were the only officer that got involved to help us. Everyone else just stood on the side and expected us to do it. And you were the only one that got involved. And it's just a really good indicator of that, the power of example of a leader. If you want to show people what good looks like and hold people to excellent standards, sometimes that means you lead by example. Well, say sometimes. All the time it means you lead by example. You set the tone. If I'm expecting people to pack that truck really well, get in there and help make sure people pack that truck really well. Own that responsibility. Don't just delegate it and leave them to do it.
One more pre-submitted question for you, Nick. Any tips for changing the culture within a team to improve its productivity and foster positivity? Probably related to what you've just said.
Yeah. So, leading. It kind of comes back to that setting the tone point, I suppose, doesn't it? So what I did with the guys in that loading trucks, I set the tone. I set the tone for, look, this is how we're going to do it. And it wasn't to be assertive, just be dominant or anything. It was to say, look, we need to do a better job, guys, and this is what a better job looks like. It kind of depends again as well in terms of what you want to change the culture from and to. So a lot of these quite tricky questions to answer without a bit more detail. But if the idea is to improve productivity and positivity, definitely being that optimist. We've had a few questions about, Colin Powell's quote about eternal optimism, the Royal Marines value of or element of the commando spirit about cheerfulness in adversity. You want people to be positive. You have to radiate positivity. No matter what bad stuff happens, you're the one going, yeah, you know what's rubbish, but look, this is what we can do with it. And we're going to show people that even when the chips are down, we can achieve excellence. And then hopefully over time, people start feeding off that energy. People quite like enthusiasm. They respond to it quite well. So if you're radiating that positivity, hopefully other people start picking up on that. And that if there's any team members that don't, are continuously the Eeyore, if you're Winnie the Pooh and constantly sort of down in the mouth, you'll soon find out who they are, and then maybe they need specific intervention to try and get them to adjust how they're operating. But positivity is the first one, and once people are positive, they're more likely then to be a bit more motivated. And again, if we want to improve productivity, well, what's stopping them being productive? Again, is it the fact that they've got really bad equipment? Is it the fact that their policy and processes are just completely inefficient? Is it the fact that their work environment is rubbish, or then they're not able to do overtime? Or is it another department in the organization that is handing them work that's not complete and ready for them to work on? What's the thing that's stopping them being productive? And if you're a leader that pays attention and an interest in identifying and fixing those problems, and your team see you doing that, they'll love you for it, because you're actually, you're receptive to the problems that they're experiencing, and you're being proactive in sorting them out. That's powerful stuff. That's setting the tone.
I really apologise if I've not picked up every question in the chat. I don't know if Craig and Michael in the background have got any questions that I've missed that you've spotted. Flash those up, please, if they're there. But otherwise, I've really enjoyed it, Nick. It's brought back some brilliant memories for me, and everything you've said, I can, absolutely guarantee from my personal experience, that I believe that you live that, and I believe that the people that you work with live that ethos as well, because I've experienced it myself and I've seen the power of it. So yeah, thank you very much. It's been, the comments in the chat, the word insightful has come up any number of times. People seem to have enjoyed it. So thank you very much, and thank you for giving us your time today and answering the questions in such an honest way.
No, my pleasure. I hope it was useful for people, and thanks very much for having me on. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, and thank you everybody for attending today.
Great. Thank you so much to our speaker today, Nick O'Sullivan, and of course, our host, Nick Smith. Thank you. Please do stay tuned to hear more about CMI membership, and do enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Don't forget, as a CMI member, you can find the latest management and leadership insights at managers.org.uk. If you're not yet a member, join our community to discover CMI Confidence with on-demand resources, our network of mentors, and industry-leading accreditations.